enough with the false flag operation that you are desperately pushing. That is why I always say question the narrative. Hey everybody, for those of you who don't know me, I am a Tennessee mom and a very active grassroots conservative in the state of Tennessee and Middle Tennessee. I wanted to bring your attention today to an interview that the president did and sort of analyze some of the things he discussed in this interview that the president did with Bret Baier. I'm not normally a huge fan of Fox News, but what I wanted to try to do is sort of hear the positive aspects of some of the things that he is saying to Bret Baier in light of some of the stuff that we are experiencing here in our country. You know, everything getting more expensive. We all acknowledge it. The president even acknowledges it in this interview. But in light of some of that stuff, also sort of go over a couple of the really big wins we've had in the Supreme Court as of late. One of which is a ruling that's been sitting in the Supreme Court for the last 6 months that I know of. And it really strikes a chord with me as a mom and my kids being in school, a public school, and what I believe I as a parent have the right to say about what my child engages with in the classroom. So let's dig into all of that, and we'll start right now with the president's interview with Bret Baier, and let's bring that up. We're going to turn on a little bit of this and listen to what the president has to say about the recent ruling in Virginia and how in Virginia, the newly elected Democrat Governor Spanberger, which some of them call her Scamberger, they attempted to, first of all, they spent millions and millions of dollars in taxpayer money to put a referendum on the ballot that really, regardless of how the constituents voted, was unconstitutional. So first, let's visit the page. I'm going to remove this really quickly. I really just want to go over something that was said by Jason Miyares. He is the former Attorney General, I think that would be under Glenn Youngkin. And I want to read what it was that he said about that ruling because, you know, he really sort of exposes the bait and switch that she essentially perpetrated on Virginians when they were going to vote on this memorandum or this referendum that was on the ballot. So let's get this up. So Jason Miyares said, enough with the false flag operation that you are desperately pushing. You told Virginia voters last fall that you wouldn't redistrict our state, silenced millions of voters, but you lied and tried to do it anyway. You knew from the very start that your scheme was illegal and unconstitutional. You had my official AG opinion, which laid out in clear detail why each action was unconstitutional, but you ignored it and pushed ahead with a referendum anyway. When a judge halted the referendum because he found it had violated the state constitution, the AG and your legal team appealed his ruling to the Virginia Supreme Court and argued that the case couldn't be heard until after the vote had taken place. Then the Virginia Supreme Court, as we all know, ruled and said you had violated the law, you lied about why you lost the case, and then some in your party even hatched a plot to remove all of the justices in retribution. If you don't know about that, basically they were going to pass some kind of a law that if you're over the age of 54, you can't serve in the Virginia State Supreme Court. So they were going to wipe out half of their Supreme Court by basically committing ageism, which is not something you would expect from a Democrat. And yet there she was. Let's go back to the president's interview with Bret Baier and listen to what he has to say about this win in Virginia.
With the President of the United States. Mr. President, you pushed redistricting, and after some really big wins in courts, including the Supreme Court, contested districts are now tilting to Republicans. It looks like they've picked up a number of seats, at least on paper. Do you think that makes the difference in holding the House?
Well, it helps. I mean, I don't know the difference. I think I think a bigger difference would be if I win quickly as opposed to after. But again, I'm not going to let the election determine what's going to happen. with respect to Iran because they cannot have a nuclear weapon. Okay.
And he's right about that. I don't think that there are too many people who would argue that the regime that currently runs Iran they shout death to America. We don't want them to have a nuclear weapon. Let's hear a little bit more about what he has to say about the implications, the confrontation over in that country. I understand how people feel about, this is what I voted for. I didn't vote the president that said no more wars. Okay, fine. I get that. And then you have a segment of the population who says, well, it's just not Christian to go. And first of all, there's a question as to whether or not what we're seeing of what is going on in Iran with regard to the damage or with regard to some of the images that we're getting from the mainstream media, calling it a genocide. A lot of that could be considered propagandists. But let's go back to the Old Testament and let's talk about how God handled lands of people that were conquered by the Israelites. And when they went in and conquered the lands, they wiped out the entire population. And I mean every man, woman, child, goat, dog, sheep. It was wiped out. And that was what God said to do. So while I don't advocate for doing that, if you can help not doing that, we don't ever want to engage in war. We don't ever want to cause death to people who are innocent and they are sort of held hostage to their own government. But at the same time, we got to consider how dangerous these people who do run their government, who are actually victims of the Iranian people are victims of their own government. So I think that is what has really held the president back from actually doing anything up to this point. So, but what we do know right now is that any kind of engagement like this in the Middle East is going to cause problems with regard to gas and oil. It always does. It always does. And so this is kind of what he has to say about that, acknowledging that, and let's hear what he has to say.
The difference would be if that price went down. Look, prices are down, but the energy caused it to go up. And I said to my people, I hate to do this to you, but I'm going to screw up your numbers for a little while because we have to stop the nuclear weapon stuff with Iran because they're nuts. Yeah. They're sick people. Even if they weren't sick, you wouldn't want it to happen, but they're crazy. We're going to take a little curve. We're going to diverge down the pike, and we're going to hit them, and we're going to stop them. And essentially, we have really put them on hold. We'll do it as quickly as we can. I call it a little pain. Look, I agree. The oil goes up, but it's going to come down lower than it was. It'll be down lower than it was. Now, speed. I hate to talk about speed.
I understand.
Because I don't like putting pressure on all of the people. I want to do the job right. If it takes an extra 4 weeks, but think of it. We're in Vietnam for 19 years. I'm here. I'm doing this for two and a half months.
There are people on one side that say, well, let's go again. Let's finish the job. Let's keep going.
There's
the people on the other side say, let's get out. And
all good people.
November is coming. The approval's upside down.
I think
you're not on the ballot, but do you think that this war...
And he's not on the ballot, and yet he is. The president is always, it seems like, on the ballot. It doesn't matter. The midterms come, whoever the president is, in a way, he's on the ballot, right? And looking at that popularity, the job performance disapproval, you got to wonder how much of that has to do with this divergent opinions on our own side, fighting for what they believe is the virtuous, righteous thing to do. And I've always said the truth is somewhere in the middle. The truth is somewhere in the middle because, let's be honest, our government is full of politicians and they aren't going to tell us the truth a lot of the time. We don't necessarily need to know everything, but we do need to know a lot. It would be nice to know. What I've always appreciated about President Trump is it seems you always know what he's thinking. I've never known him to not be just no filter. He has no filter. So I feel pretty confident that I know what he's thinking generally, but at the same time, you don't want to give away your entire game plan. He is the president of the United States, so he's not going to say everything on a news media broadcast where that would then give away our position and make us vulnerable. And that's the last thing I believe he wants to do. Regardless of what side you're on, I mean, honestly, I know I have friends that don't trust him anymore. They don't recognize him anymore. They're saying all of this. A lot of that comes from the stuff they're listening to on the other side. I am trying to stay somewhere in the middle, which normally I hate that because I call it the squishy middle. I usually encourage people to take a side. But in this instance, I feel like the middle is the safest place to be because everybody's got an agenda if you're on the far end of this side or the far end of this side. And when I say that, I mean, if you're with the Tucker and the Candace camp, you're the far end of this side. If you're fully MAGA and with Donald Trump, you're far on this side. I always think somewhere in the middle, everybody's got their agendas on either side. That is why I always say question the narrative. We're getting narratives thrown at us from every side, and everybody has to pay attention to what is being said to them and think critically about what you're hearing and do your own homework. I trust the president. I'm not going to say that I don't because I do. But I think that there are aspects of arguments that I hear from this side over here with certain things that I go, there's some validity to that. But I'm not going to go all the way over there. And at the same time, over here, I'm also going to question. So let's listen to a little bit more of what he has to say.
And this moment is going to affect your ability to hold the House and Senate.
So yesterday they had 18 elections. I won all 18. Everybody I endorsed won. 2 weeks ago, in a very big event, Indiana had like 8 people that had never lost an election. Some were in for 25 years. They had a 40-point lead, but they didn't want to they didn't want to give some additional people in Congress. Very simple.
Redistricting.
And I said, you know what? If they don't want to redistrict, they're not for us. And I ran candidates that nobody ever heard of, but good people. And everyone won, other than one because 2 or 3 people ran. Actually, it was very smart.
I want to say in Tennessee, it hasn't always been a great thing to get a Trump endorsement, at least not for the grassroots. We kind of wish he'd sort of stay out of our state level races. That's kind of how we feel. And I feel that way as well. I wish that he would sort of just not endorse and let the people decide who they want representing them without the interference of Washington, D.C. at these state level races.
CNN did a poll recently that said I'm 100% approval in the Republican Party with MAGA, which is most of the Republican Party. So I think it's almost all of it now, actually. I'm at 100%.
I'm going to dispute that. I'm MAGA. I would consider myself MAGA. I was at January 6th. I stood there in the freezing cold for 8 hours and voted for Donald Trump 6 times. But that doesn't mean that I approve 100% of everything that's happening. But generally speaking, I think we're headed in the right direction. And my goodness, we've had more wins in the last year and a half than we had in the previous 4 years under Joe Biden, which I'm going to get to right now. This one in particular for me is a big deal, because I am going to share with you this Fox News report from Shannon Breen, because it addresses a Supreme Court ruling that has been sitting sort of incubating at the Supreme Court level for several months now. It is the Mahmoud v. Taylor. So the Mahmoud v. Taylor case essentially was a case out of Michigan, and it rules that parents have a First Amendment right to opt their child out of public school instruction involving LGBTQ themes. The 6-3 conservative majority, we know who those were, determined that denying parents the right to withdraw their kids from these lessons imposes an unconstitutional burden on their religious practices.
Regarding religious liberty and whether parents should be informed and be able to opt their children out from reading books in the classroom that go against their faith. Shannon Bream is at the Supreme Court. We were watching for this one. What's the verdict?
We were, Dana. So this brought together a coalition of parents of different religious faiths and backgrounds who said there used to be a rule in this particular school district that would let them know when there were books that dealt with issues that may be in conflict with their religious faith. Well, so many parents were opting out that the school board and the school district quit doing it. Well, 6-3 today in a decision by Justice Alito, they said these parents have earned at least a preliminary injunction. So while this case plays out, they said the board has to notify them about a book that's in question or anything similar so that their kids can be excused if it's in conflict with their faith. He says, as we've explained, without that, parents are left this choice: either risk their child's exposure to burdensome instruction or pay substantial sums for alternative educational services. Because at one point, Justice Jackson during the arguments had said, why don't they just go to a different school? Why don't you put them in private school or homeschool them? Justice Alito and others saying that's not practical for a lot of people. The dissent by Justice Sotomayor, joined by Justices Kagan and Jackson, says today's ruling threatens the essence of public education. She says it's not about bringing kids together to learn about a particular faith, but a range of concepts and views that reflect our entire society. Exposure to new ideas has always been a vital part of that project until now. The dissenters didn't think that the parents should get the opt-out. Justice Alito and the majority say they should.
What's really interesting about this case is it involves parents of different faiths. So there were Christian parents and there were parents that are Muslim. And I can tell you, as somebody who for a very short time lived in the Detroit area, I think the school is in Dearborn, Michigan. There is a large Muslim population that live in that area, and they are absolutely 100% against, for religious reasons, they are against their children being subjected to LGBTQ materials and books. And we're talking, here's the thing. We're talking grade schoolers, first grade, second grade, third grade. These are not themes schools should have the right to expose kids to, especially when parents are completely against that. This is a subject that is for the home, and you have religious reasons for not wanting your child to be subjected to it. You absolutely should have the parental right to keep them from being exposed to it, hands down. We have fought against that here in Tennessee as well. So we've been called bigots for it. But you know what? My children, my decision, my choice. And that should absolutely never, ever, ever, those rights as parents should never be infringed upon as far as those issues. If you're talking about a school district versus a parent, then the parent absolutely should have those rights. So all of this is to say we've had some wins, and especially at the Supreme Court level, we've had some really big wins. And that is because of the justices that President Trump had sworn in and fought for at the Supreme Court level. Am I happy with all of them? No, not all of the rulings are things I've been happy about. Some of the stuff that has come from Amy Coney Barrett or Gorsuch, even Kavanaugh, have been a bit mystifying to me. And I think part of that comes from the fact that they used to work for George Bush. Kavanaugh and Barrett worked for George Bush and his administration. So that sort of explains it. But otherwise, in general, mostly, I mean, for criminy sakes, what happened with the Virginia that went to the Supreme Court, it was 9-0. Even the three witches, Kagan, Sotomayor, and Brown Jackson, even those three, and Brown Jackson, I question her intelligence. Even she did not want to have anything to do with what was going on and with the redistricting in Virginia, and they shut it down. So I just wanted to kind of go over all of those things with y'all. I know it was a bit of a longer show today. As we lead into the midterms, I see more good than bad. And I want people to get out and I want them to vote in the midterms because we have to keep the House. We absolutely have to keep the House if we're going to get anything substantive done in the next 2 years, in the last 2 years of President Trump's second term. So anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you have a great Sunday afternoon. This is Kelly Jackson, and I am still not canceled. I will be back with you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.